Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1. I've had exactly 1 hour of sleep. We've watched the Japanese Grand Prix and I'm ready to go. Make sure you like and subscribe before we get into the video as we look through what I thought was a very exciting Japanese Grand Prix. Lots of overtakes up and down the grid, mainly revolving around tyre strategy, which I thought was incredibly interesting. Some very good drives from individual drivers. Overall, a great race. Let's get into it. We have Max Verstappen on pole position, Sergio Perez alongside. Interestingly, though, this is Sergio Perez's first front row start since Miami last year, and it's the first Red Bull front row lockout since Bahrain last year. So, quite rare, this front row. All things considered, looking at how dominant that Red Bull car is, maybe it points to Checo's lack of qualifying pace, especially in the midpoint of last year. But yeah, we don't really see a Red Bull front row lockout that much anymore. The big thing going into the race was the weather and how hot it was. They didn't expect it to be as hot as it was, especially with the previous 2 days being a lot cooler, and also without the running in FP2 due to the rain. So the whole tyre strategy was very much up in the air, with a lot of the teams not really knowing how the tyres were going to react to the track in general, never mind with that added heat. In terms of starting tyres, we have Alonso, Hulkenberg, Bottas, Albon, Ocon, Stroll, Gasly and Sargent all on the softs, and the rest on the mediums. At the start of the race, Max gets away and leads quite well, but not for too long because the race is red flagged after a crash between Ricciardo and Albon. This is just coming out of turn 1 on the little straight before the turn 2 and the S's through sector 1. What looks like happened here was Ricciardo was looking in his mirrors to have a look at where Stroll was, didn't expect Albon to try and make a move around the outside, tapped him into there, and then both of them went into the barriers. It looked like quite a heavy shunt, and it ripped a lot of the tyres off of the wall, but it seems like they were both okay, and there wasn't too much damage on, especially Albon's car. I don't think was too damaged. Who knows how that chassis is? That's the big conversation around the Williams at the minute, so we'll have to wait and see. But thankfully, both of them was okay. Red flag just to fix the barrier. So, took about 15-20 minutes to fix the barrier again, and then we're going to go racing. Yes, I'd like to say on that again, I personally think it's a racing incident. I don't think any of them needs a penalty. I'd point the blame more towards Ricciardo than Albon, but at the exact same time, I don't think it is a incident that requires a penalty. I think it's just one of those things that happens and we just move on from it. On the restart though, tyres have changed, not for everyone, but now there are a few guys starting on the hards. That includes Hamilton, Russell, Ocon, Gasly and Sargent. We've got Alonso, Hulkenberg, Bottas, Yuki and Stroll and Zhou, as well on the softs. Everyone else on the mediums. Max once again gets away quite well. Someone who didn't get away well was Nico Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg, I think, was 11th on the restart, but yes, gets really bogged down and goes all the way to the back of the grid. Real disappointing start for him on this restart here. Russell is able to get past Yuki for P9 on lap 5. This is when the first few pit stops start coming in. The first one was Nico Hulkenberg on lap 6 for the hard tyres. Sergio Perez goes very wide further up the grid and runs off into that area just underneath where the circuit goes over itself and gets a loss of the paint of the curb onto the tyre. We saw that happen a few times. I think it was in qualifying. But yeah, luckily he was able to get that off the tyres quite quickly. Otherwise, I imagine that would very much hinder the grip on that tyres. Valtteri Bottas comes into the pits on lap 7, and this year the Stake F1 team kick Sauber pit stops are something which everyone's been paying very close attention to, especially with the 30-40 seconds pit stops they've been having. This one, only 4 seconds, so a very good pit stop for them there as he moved over to the hard tyres. Yuki Tsunoda came in, as did Zhou. Russell is closing in on the back of Hamilton on the track, and Logan Sargent is having a fantastic race at this point, getting past Pierre Gasly for P13. Leclerc is closing in on Oscar Piastri. Norris pits, and as does Zhou. Zhou pitting for the second time in just 3 laps. So an issue starting for Zhou very early on in this race. Piastri and Stroll pit, and Zhou is in again just 2 laps later. Alonso also pits, and this is when Zhou gets the message, retire the car. They said over the radio it was a gearbox issue. I don't know if that has been confirmed again, but yeah, Zhou out of the race, the third retiree from this race. Logan Sargent now is getting past Ocon for P11 on lap 15. Now, during the red flag, there was all these jokes going around of, oh, we're going to get Sargent out of his car and put Albon in, making reference to the whole chassis thing. And when I saw some of these overtakes that Logan Sargent was doing, I thought maybe they had done that, because there were some good moves from Logan here. I mean, they were on the Alpines, who had no pace all weekend, but nonetheless, still some very good moves from him. Perez pits on lap 16, a 2.1 second pit stop, very good from the Red Bull team, who are consistently good at those pit stops. Carlos Sainz pits on lap 16 as well. Norris is ahead of Perez and Sainz, all 3 of them pitting, and Norris able to utilise that undercut, which is very strong at the Suzuka circuit today. Max Verstappen pits from the lead on lap 16. Lando Norris has a fantastic move around the outside of Lewis Hamilton for P4 on lap 17. And then Sergio Perez, just, my goodness, I know he had a tyre advantage at this point, but some of the moves that he was doing were absolutely fantastic. When you have a tyre advantage like that, it can be very easy to just kind of take the easy moves. You know you can probably get them into turn 1 after the DRS. But Perez was not having any of that today. Really just going for it. A fantastic move into 130R to get past Hamilton for P5. Then a couple laps later, he does the exact same move on Russell. Really, really committed, great driving from Sergio Perez. Bottas is making some good moves at this point now. He gets past Sargent for P11. That was on lap 18. And then Yuki Tsunoda is on the back of Sargent now for P13. Sainz is able to get past Hamilton for P6. And then Max Verstappen is able to get past Charles Leclerc for P1 on lap 21. Leclerc hadn't pit yet and wasn't really putting up much of a fight. He knew that his fight wasn't with Verstappen at that point. Hamilton gets very annoyed on the radio at this point, asking for a strategy change. The Mercedes strategy idea was after the red flag, they went on the hards. They were going to try and do a one-stop from there. Because they had started on the mediums, then gone to the hards during the red flag, that constitutes their 2 tyre compounds, so they can just go hard from there, but it really just was not working. They were just dropping down the grid, going slower and slower, and at this point in the race it did seem like the Mercedes were in a kind of lose-lose situation, because either they stick with the one stop and just go backwards, or they abandon the one stop, change their strategy, have to pit multiple times, and just go backwards. So it was not a great race weekend all in all for the Mercedes team. And then Alonso gets past Lewis Hamilton on lap 22. We now have a little battle here between Perez and Norris. This is for on track will be P3, but really is P2 because Leclerc is ahead of them and still hadn't pit. Perez was able to get past him on lap 23. Russell pits on lap 23 as well for the hards and is followed in by Magnussen, Bottas, Sargent, Yuki and Lance Stroll all at the same time. Some great pit stops here from the teams, especially from Yuki Tsunoda, who I think had the fastest of the lot. I personally think that Lance Stroll had an unsafe release during these pit stops because he came out basically wheel to wheel with, I think it was Magnussen. And then as they were coming out, they were still wheel to wheel. I felt personally that was an unsafe release, but the stewards thought it was fine, apparently. Lewis Hamilton finally pits on lap 24 for the hard tyres. Perez is chasing down Charles Leclerc at this point, and Leclerc goes very wide in the exact same place that Perez went wide earlier on, allowing Perez to just go down the inside and take P2. Now Norris is all over the back of Charles Leclerc, and McLaren tell Norris to come into the pits to try and get the undercut on Leclerc, the issue being that Leclerc pits at the exact same time they both move to the hards. So really, at that point, I don't know what would have been better for Norris tries to come in behind him or maybe go out and have another lap. I'm not entirely sure which way it would have gone. With the undercut working as strong as it did at this race, it probably was best for him to follow him in there and just try and pass him on the track. Piastri pits on lap 33 for the hards. And then we have another fantastic battle in the middle of the grid. A lot of guys who are very similar speeds this weekend in the middle of the grid, fighting for like 10th, 11th, 12th place. This time it was Yuki Tsunoda and Nico Hülkenberg. There was a lot of weaving from Hülkenberg on the main straight, and I don't think it got brought up. Later on, Magnussen's weaving would be brought up, but I didn't think it was as bad as Hülkenberg's one. Yuki does get past him eventually around the outside. It was a fantastic move from Yuki Tsunoda in his home race. More pit stops coming now from Perez, Alonso and Verstappen, all moving on to the hards. Lance Stroll pits on lap 36 for the soft tyres. Now, I thought at the time this was very early for the soft tyres, because we saw guys at the start really struggling, but then the Astons themselves actually made the soft tyres work. Both Astons started both race starts on the softs and made them work for quite a long period into the race. So the Aston is doing quite a good job at saving its tyres there. Carlos Sainz also pits on lap 37 to the hards. And we get Sainz up against Hamilton again, for this time for P6 on lap 38. Also on that lap, Russell pits, and 2 laps later, Hamilton pits. Logan Sargent, who was having an okay race, like I said, he wasn't really challenging for points at this time, but he was ahead of the Alpines, and I think he might have been ahead of Bottas, I'm not entirely sure, but in the exact same place that Leclerc and Perez went wide, he had a big old lockup and went off into the gravel trap. He was very lucky not to hit the barrier and was able to reverse the car and able to carry on with the race, but at this point he was right at the back. Looking at Norris now, who was being chased down by Carlos Sainz. He had a lockup as he went into the hairpin, so Sainz was able to get right on the back of him and then pass him and chase down Charles Leclerc for P3 with 8 laps to go. So the Ferraris were allowed to fight with 8 laps to go, which I think is great to see. A lot of teams wouldn't allow their drivers to fight at this point in the race, but they knew that maybe a Norris would have been a threat to Leclerc, so why not, let them have a little fight. If Sainz can get through, that's great. Secure that podium for the team, and if, Norris gets past Leclerc, he gets past Leclerc, rather than saying, no, Sainz, you've got to stay behind, and then risking losing 2 positions there. So a good call yet again from Ferrari, who are doing pretty much everything right at the minute. They're having a jolly good time in Maranello. Sainz is able to pass Leclerc though for P3 on lap 46. Further down the grid, George Russell is all over the back of Oscar Piastri. Now he goes for a dive bomb into the last chicane, and it was never ever on. He went for the dive bomb. It was never going to happen. Piastri had to go off the track and cut the chicane to not have contact, and then carry on from there, and Russell was able to get on the back of him, and Russell would eventually pass him. Now, what I find incredibly interesting here is I don't think this will be looked at, but this, for me, is the exact example of kind of what happened in Australia with Russell and Alonso, but it's slightly different in the terms of there was no contact here, but there was no contact because Piastri avoided it. This, for me, was a really reckless move from Russell that was never on and could have caused a collision. And that, for me, should get a penalty. We talk about all the time, the FIA, they don't penalise you for the outcome of the move, they penalise you for the move. This move could have caused a collision. And, it's the exact same thing with the Australia thing, where Alonso got a penalty because Russell crashed. If everything had gone the exact same way, but Russell had managed to keep it on the track and keep on going, Alonso probably wouldn't even been investigated. He wouldn't have had a penalty. We can argue all day if the penalty was right or wrong. Personally, I think that penalty was wrong. But in this case here, that was a dangerous move that could have caused a collision, and I think Russell deserves to have a penalty for it because it was a really quite reckless move at the end of a race. But I don't think we will see that. Anyway, there's my little rant over. Like I said, Russell does get past Piastri in the end. Then we go to the checkered flag. Max Verstappen winning the race, back on top. There you go, the start of a new win streak. So we had 10 in a row, and he had 9 in a row. So this will be 8 wins in a row now for Max Verstappen, starting from now. Sergio Perez comes home in P2 to mean it is the 4th 1-2 finish in a row. 3 of them for Red Bull, 1 of them for Ferrari. Great drive from Perez as well. You know, I think a lot of people might put him down, being like, oh, look, he was this, like, 10 seconds behind Max. But, you know, I think for Perez, this was a fantastic drive with some fantastic overtakes. Carlos Sainz completes the podium. Charles Leclerc in 4th, who completed the one-stop, got it to work. Fantastic drive for him. I think he got driver of the day as well, which was well-deserved. Lando Norris in 5th, with Alonso in 6th. Russell 7th, Piastri 8th, Hamilton 9th, Yuki Tsunoda in 10th, bringing home 1 point, his first ever point at his home race. Nico Hülkenberg in 11th, another great result for Hülkenberg and for Haas. Stroll in 12th, I mean, an okay recovery for him, not a great qualifying, we spoke about that yesterday, and, you know, an okay recovery, I guess. I would have expected him to do a little bit better, but there you go. Magnussen had a good drive to bring it home in 13th. Bottas in 14th. The car looking better. The car itself, I think I said this after testing, the car itself looks quite good and is quite a good race car. And we've seen that Bottas and Zhou have been able to get that car into good positions. What lets them down is the pit stops. And the pit stops, whilst they weren't perfect today, they were a hell of a lot better than they have been. And thanks to that, they were able to get an okay position of 14th. Once they were able to cut those pit stops down from 4 seconds to 2 seconds, then maybe we might be able to see Bottas challenging the likes of the Hasses and maybe even Yuki Tsunoda. Alpine still in a very bad place. 15th for Ocon, 16th for Gasly. Yeah, still not working for them. They brought their first upgrades of the year to this race. And, I mean, they seem to have a bit more qualifying pace, but race pace just is not there. They fell down very, very quickly. And then there was Logan Sargent, who was the last of the finishers. Made that big mistake, like I said, and was just at the back from there. Then 3 DNFs, Zhou, Ricciardo, and Albon. So there you go. There is our recap for the Japanese Grand Prix. Again, really enjoyed this one. Thought it was a really fun race. Really interesting strategy choices, which was different across the entire grid. Some really fun overtakes as well. It was a good one. We'll be back in 2 weeks for the Chinese Grand Prix, but in between then we'll have the driver ratings out tomorrow, and then next Friday we'll have a video out here as well. Not entirely sure what it is, but yes, subscribe and it'll pop up for you on Friday. And if there's any news between now and then, we'll have the news video on Saturday. All of that to come, so make sure you subscribe for it. Until then, though, have a good one. I'll see you later. I'm going to bed. Goodbye.